Before we get started, I just wanted to, we were talking about the cat, the barn cat versus the house cat, and I was just going to say that sometimes even in the same household, we don't agree. So we have a little cat that was an outdoor cat before I adopted it from the shelter, and she likes to go outside, and my husband is a firm believer in all cats have to stay indoors, and every now and then I'll kind of sneak Shelby out the door if she really wants to go, because I feel, we live in a pretty safe neighborhood, and we live in a cul-de-sac. We have an easement in the back, so we don't have a lot of, traffic or anything. But then about 2 weeks ago, my husband said he was outside and the dogs were barking, and real strange bark, and he said I went out there to see what was going on, and there were 2 coyotes out in our easement. So Shelby's not going out anymore. I hate to tell her, but that was it for me. So she's staying indoors. This lecture that I'm doing, actually I usually do this a 2-hour lecture for that university down south that the earlier lecture was talking about. So I try to condense it into like a half an hour. So I may be going pretty quickly to try to get through all of this, but I kind of narrowed it down into what our topics were today in just a small animal. Just a little thought that I think it's really important that we look at cruelty and deal with it and not ignore it and set it aside. I know we're all busy with our lives, and especially as veterinarians, we've got so many things that we have to do that not always do we want to take the time to deal with this, but I think it's very important. And I think Debbie went over what actually cruelty is very well and gave us a firm understanding of what it is. Like she said, my understanding of cruelty might be a lot different than what somebody calling us. We get a lot of calls that, gee, this person has their dog and they're outside all the time, but if it's got a dog house and it's being fed and watered, there's not a lot we can do. But what I want to talk about a little bit too is the state cruelty laws and how they vary from state to state. So I don't know if we have anybody here from out of state.
Mark Timmon, you have a call line too. Mark, call line 2.
But if we do, you should know your own cruelty laws because they're going to vary from state to state. Some states are going to be very specific with their cruelty laws. Some states are going to be very vague. Some states have cruelty laws that only apply to mammals, and everybody else is on their own. So very important that you need to know what your state laws are. Michigan has very good cruelty laws, very specific laws, laws against abandonment, neglect, as Debbie was talking about, even tethering a dog. So we have very good laws, and if you go on the internet, you can certainly find these laws, and actually Michigan State, the College of Law, has a wonderful website, and if you go on there, it lists all the states and their cruelty laws. Is very helpful if you're looking for that information. This also is another website, and this is just kind of like FYI, called petabuse.com, and it's a voluntary reporting, and you can go on this site. It'll have like a map of the United States, and you can click on the map, and you can go to the state, and they'll list all the cruelty cases that are either pending or have been determined. And it's just kind of interesting to see the various ways that people can get creative to abuse animals, stabbings, burnings, dragging with a car. It just kind of gives you a feel for what's out there. So again, we're all busy with our lives. We all have things that we have to do, families, practices, or whether we're teaching. And it's like, why should we really worry about animal cruelty? There's so many other important things out there in the world. But really, the views about animal cruelty are changing, especially with the media, like the Michael Vick case. The public is becoming much more aware of it, and it's out there, and we do need to deal with it. Some states do have mandatory reporting for veterinarians. It's an ethical duty for the veterinarian, according to the MVMA. And there is a link between animal cruelty and human violence. These are all reasons why we need to be concerned with it. So what they did is they took the serial killers, serial rapists, they went back and looked through their background, and a lot of these people have animal abuse as one of the first things that was in their repertoire, shall we say. So there is definitely a link between violence and animal abuse. Also, like the school shootings, there's a link. Boston Strangler, Ted Bundy. These are all people that, when they went back and looked through their childhood, they found that they actually had abused animals as a starting point. And that's not to say that anybody who abuses an animal is going to go on to be a serial killer. I mean, that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that it's a red flag. It's something that we really should be concerned with and not just, throw it under the table, so to speak. If this is seen as something that is a premonition for something that could go on and be much more serious, if we catch it early, perhaps we could save lives. The other thing that Debbie alluded to was the connection between animal abuse and also domestic violence. 71% of pet-owning women entering women's shelters reported that the batterer had injured, maimed, killed, or threatened the family pet. And we do see a lot of it. Debbie made reference to the turtle and the kitten that were abused. A few years ago, we had a person who stabbed a dog in its doghouse because he was trying to get to the girlfriend that was in the house. He couldn't get to her, so he stabbed the puppy out in the yard. Unfortunately, we didn't have an actual witness to that, so we ended up losing that case. But it just goes to show you the link between the two. We often see people who come in. We've had one time an Italian greyhound that was thrown against the wall. The boyfriend did it, and actually, when we x-rayed the dog for the broken leg, we actually noticed that there were some broken ribs, and the girlfriend finally confessed that, yes, her boyfriend had done this. She didn't want to prosecute. She didn't want to make any kind of waves because she was afraid for her own life. And we did she surrendered the dog to us, and we found it a home. But these are just examples of the connection between the two. We also find that children will start to harm the animal too. Sometimes it's because that's the only control they have. Sometimes they'll injure it to try to keep it from being injured by a parent, or sometimes it's what they see happening in their own home and then they imitate that. So this is very important. Investigation of animal abuse is often the first point of social services intervention for a family in trouble. So if we do as veterinarians see something like this and we are suspicious of it, it is very important for us to report it because this might be just the tip of the iceberg. So again, animal cruelty, not a harmless venting of emotion in a healthy individual, a warning sign. So hopefully it's kind of making an impression that this is something very important. And then Randall Lockwood, he's done quite a bit as far as the connection between animal abuse and human violence. And he did a survey of the deans of 31 veterinary schools and found that even though it's very important, animal abuse and the connection, they also found that people or students aren't very well prepared. That although they will be seeing cruelty cases, the schools weren't doing a really good job of preparing the student to, when they saw them, what to do with them. So in here, the average veterinary curriculum spends only 8 minutes on the issue of animal cruelty. And I think things are changing. Like I said, I get invited or had been invited for several years to go down to Ohio State to give a lecture regarding animal abuse. And I think that it's being added more into the curriculum of the veterinary schools, which I think is a very good thing. The other thing that was interesting in this lecture was that we was going to see abuse, whether it be rural, urban, or suburban areas. We're going to see abuse in all those areas. The other thing that was brought up in this, which is still today, is really there's no widely agreed upon standard for identifying an animal that's been abused. And this makes it a little difficult for the veterinarian because we can't really just go to a book and say, oh yes, the animal's got this, this, and this, so this is an abuse case. There is more material out there. There's more books and information out there for veterinary forensics and animal abuse now than there were 20-some years ago when I first started doing this. But still, we need more information and more training. So other veterinary concerns, as a veterinarian, we feel confident being able to recognize cruelty. Do we feel confident writing up medicals and doing necropsies? And do we feel confident testifying in court? These are all concerns for the veterinarian. So reporting animal cruelty, somebody had a question about it, and in Michigan, we are not mandated to report cruelty. We don't have to report cruelty. There are 11 states, though, that do mandate it, and in fact, I think it's Kansas that if you don't report it, you can actually be disciplined for it. We have 5 states that have practice acts that require a veterinarian to report animal cruelty and animal fighting, but Michigan, we're not required to do that. The AVMA, though, I think their latest statement was in 2009. They do say that the veterinarian has an ethical duty to report animal cruelty. We are in Michigan protected from violating the confidentiality of a client if we report animal abuse or neglect. Okay, so as a veterinarian, I hope now that you're thinking, boy, this is really important, this is something I should know about, something I should report if I see it. So there are various roles that we can play in cruelty investigations. We can be the complainant, we can see something and make the complaint. We can help the investigators out by either interpreting a lab test or answering the question, is it cruelty? We can perform a necropsy, perform an examination, write a medical, testify in court, visit locations, or maybe do education. Sometimes we can examine a crime scene, help maintain the chain of custody of evidence. We can help with the care of the survivors. We can provide medical care and housing, advise the investigator and the prosecutor, do a media interview, or provide euthanasia for those animals that are so severely injured that they cannot be saved. So as a complainant, where would we be when we see something like this? And it may be doing our job. We may be in the clinic or out on a farm call and see abuse. Many years ago when I first got out of vet school, I thought I wanted to be an equine veterinarian. So I spent 3 years in a mixed animal practice, and after I was kicked across the barnyard about 6 or 7 times, I decided maybe that wasn't for me. But during those 3 years, I did see 2 cases of animal, actually cruelty, 2 horses, starvation cases. At the time, it was a very small community. It was a rural community. We didn't really have a police force. We didn't have a humane society. We had the sheriff department. So I really didn't know who to talk to. I can remember going to one house where they had in those days, a big TV was an oddity, but they had a big TV in a nice house, and their horse out in the barn was a skeleton and dying of starvation. And I thought, boy, this is, wow. But I didn't know what to do about it, so I put the horse down, and that was the end of it. So it could be a client that you see that's involved, that's cruelty. Could be a neighbor, could be a stranger, could be something that you see just driving along. So there could be a reluctance to make a complaint, especially if it's about a client. You may be worried about confidentiality, immunity from liability. If you make a complaint, are you liable for that? There's a lot of time commitment once you make a complaint. You might be asked to write a medical or do a necropsy or testify in court. And our court system in Detroit, Debby can attest to this, sometimes it's hurry up, go and sit and wait for hours. So there are a lot of things that come into play when you're going to make a complaint. And another thing is personal safety. Some of the people that we deal with are not very nice, especially like with the dog fighting. But one of the questions I think that we can help the investigator out and answer is it cruelty? And Debby talked a little bit about this. Sometimes we'll get an animal in and they'll say, well, it looks like it's starved, and but maybe the owner's got some papers with it. Maybe the dog has cancer and they've been treating the dog, and now it's time they've decided to put the dog to sleep. So sometimes we can help the investigator make that determination. There's breed of dog, large animal variations that sometimes the investigator's not aware of, and we can help with that. And then the length of time of the disease or trauma. A lot of cases they'll bring to us, and the common thing is, it wasn't like that yesterday, you know, so it's like something just happened overnight, and we can tell the investigator, no, this didn't happen in the last 24 hours, this took a lot longer than that. So one of the things, it's like if somebody calls and says, I've got a brindle and white dog and it's really skinny and I think it's a Cruelty, and they, you know, we go out there and we see a sight hound, we might be able to educate them, versus a brindle and white dog that's really, really skinny that really is a case of neglect. So with our Cruelty complaints and what we might see, there are some risk factors for certain animals. And cats and dogs under 2 years of age are the most common animals at risk. And I'm not sure if this is because usually those are the dogs that are more likely to make accidents in the house or have behavior issues, or because most of the dogs that are abused don't make it past 2 years of age. The other thing that we know that's more at risk is pit bulls and related breeds, and male dogs more than females. And this was a study done for some risk factors. Vague explanations for injuries, unable to explain injuries, different stories or the stories change, multiple fractures of different ages in the same animal. And that's what we found in that Italian Greyhound when we went to x-ray its leg, and then we saw the other fractures. Multiple animals in household injured, repetitive history of accidents or deaths, and personal awareness of violence in the household. And another study was done for conditions suggestive of animal abuse, and some of them are pretty, you know, like poor physical condition, no food, abandonment, collar too tight, lack of medical care, excessive matting, parasites, sanitation, the presence of dead animals, inadequate lighting, ventilation, and overcrowding. Owner that lives in isolation, that's usually with our hoarders. Again, hoarders unable to afford food for both themselves and their animals, and usually those are the ones that are unwilling to tell us how many animals they have. Dealt with several hoarders, and usually when they come into the clinic, I'll ask them, oh, how many kitties you got, or how many dogs do you have, and they're very vague about it. And usually I just see their animals for when they've got some terrible problem, usually not for vaccinations or routines, it's usually they're on the verge of death. You know, they're like three paws in the grave when I see them. So those are usually warning signs. Now this is, when Debbie was talking about how, you know, they come to me for all sorts of questions, and, you know, this program I put up there because I am not CSI. And sometimes when they come to me with things like, a dog's been dead and buried for 3 weeks, and can we dig it up, and can you tell me why it died? You know, I have to tell them that, no, I'm not CSI, I can't do that, and, you know, send it to Michigan State. But I can help them a lot, and some of the things I can help them with are blood tests, x-rays, necropsies, or drugs found at the scene or location. So sometimes it's pretty straightforward. She brings me an animal, and it's got a wound and a broken leg, and she's like, you know, what do you think caused it? Because, you know, we have a report that it might have been shot, and sometimes we get lucky and we do an x-ray and we can answer her questions, not a problem. A lot of what she asked me too is, you know, things that they find at the scene. Sometimes it's supplements to make the animals supposedly fight better and harder. Sometimes it's pretty interesting what they will find there. I mean, sometimes there's controlled substances that they bring to me. So, you know, obviously not something the average person has in their medicine cabinet. Another thing that they'll do is ask me to do a necropsy. Sometimes it'll give us clues to the death. Sometimes time of death, I'm not real good at that, but usually cause we can help them out with. And again, the answer, the question, is it cruelty or is it not? So this is one of our cases where Woman comes home, she finds her little dog, she finds the house covered in blood, they find a knife at the scene. The boyfriend was there, and he tells us that the dog ran out the street and got hit by a car. And we do a necropsy, and we find 3 stab wounds in the top of the dog's skull, made by a very sharp instrument. So sometimes our necropsies can dispute what the offender or defendant says happened to the animal. The other thing that we're asked to do a lot is to do medical forms. So I like to use a consistent form, try to do the same form with all the animals so that people know and it's easy to read. We want to identify the animal, make sure it's got a number, chain of evidence. You know, she has to get that number to me, and I have to follow through and make sure that number matches the animal when I go to see it. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. I tell the investigators to take a picture of everything that you can. It really helps. Nothing's better than going into the court and having a before and after picture with the animal that was maybe 50% underweight, and then you have a picture of it with its weight back. Prosecutors love that. So we use a form that tells us, and I like to get as much history I can if the investigator has some history, like, where did they find the dog, what possibly happened to it. Sometimes I just get a one line, found dead dog. But the more information I get, the better. And then we use the form, the Tufts form, for the emaciation versus the Purina form. It just makes it a little easier because this just goes from normal to skinny versus normal to fat and then skinny. And so we use this form consistently, and we'll kind of, if I have to, I'll even attach it with the documentation. If we're doing a dog fighting case, the ASPCA has a real nice form that you can take right off their website. It's called a scar chart, and what I'll do is I'll write down all the different scars and make a notation and draw pictures of it right on the page there. I think it makes it look more, I guess, rather than just describing, yeah, it had a lot of scars, if you can actually point them out and show them and mark them in red, it makes it look better. So testifying in court, it can be intimidating to be in court. I think I've done it so much now that it doesn't bother me anymore. But the first few times, you remember the Perry Mason cases and everything. And really the defense attorney is not very nice. I mean, that's his job. He's trying to get you to say something that you shouldn't, or to have you maybe say something and not what you were intending to say and that type of thing. But even though it can be a little bit intimidating, really, veterinarians are still the good guys, and they are the experts in court. And I've been on many, many cases where through the testimony of the veterinarian, the judge has said, look, if the veterinarian who's the expert says it's like this, then it's like this. So, I tell people who ask me, what do you, how do you do that? What do you say? You just tell the truth. You answer the question to the best of your ability. You tell the truth, and you are the expert up there. And good preparation certainly is helpful. Sometimes I'll actually talk to the prosecutor beforehand, and actually tell them what questions would be good for them to ask, because they don't always know what they should be asking you. So if you can go and ask them ahead of time and say, look, this is what I want to be able to say, so ask me this, this, and this, it really helps. And payment for testifying, it's part of my job. I don't get paid anything more, but if you were going to testify for an organization, you may receive some payment. So visiting locations, I used to do a lot more of this than I do now because our investigators are so good and they've been through so much training that I don't have to anymore. But we used to go out to barns and stables. We used to go to a lot of hoarding areas and look at the animals. Don't do many crime scene investigations, but it's something that you may be asked to do. So, we may be asked to go out and look at a condition of animals, how they're housed. And as far as the different veterinarians involved in these cases, you know, you could be a private veterinarian in private practice. Shelter veterinarians see a lot of these abuse cases, or you could be working at a university and, you know, be a pathologist and work on a case like this. So Debbie asked me to put in a slide about helping the investigator and what, as veterinarians, what we can do to help the investigator. And one of the important things is to get to the animal early. Okay, if we've got something that's a wound or bites from dog fighting, really, really important to try to get to that animal as soon as you can. Don't wait, you know, 3 to 4 days when the wounds have all healed and the animal's doing much better, and then go out there and try to describe it. Get to the animal early. Try to determine the length of time the injury's been there and whether or not any medical treatment's been done that really helps them. The other thing that she asked me to remind us is to use language that they can understand. I mean, sometimes she'll bring me a medical report written by a veterinarian and she's like, I think I know 3 words on this whole thing. What does this mean? So really try to use language that the investigator can understand, that the prosecutor can understand. Communicate with the investigator and the prosecutor. If there's something important that you want them to ask you on the stand, let them know that. Tell them, you know, what you know and what questions. The other thing is important to ask them, you know, what are you about to ask me on the stand? Because sometimes you don't know the answer to a question and you don't really want them to ask you that. So real important. And then sometimes, you know, there's just something beyond what I can do, and I will say, you know, really, this really needs to go to Michigan State. It really needs to go to a pathologist, someone who can do something better than I can do as far as, you know, certain necropsies and certain things. Okay. She says I can have 5 more minutes. Okay. So I'm just going to go over this real quick because Debbie already did this, but she has her ways of categorizing cruelty cases, and I kind of do mine a little differently. But I just want to go over real quick and how we handle these from the veterinarian's perspective. So the inadequate food and water, she went over the different reasons why it could be, whether they're not being fed enough or insufficient quality or quantity or a medical condition. And what I like to do is when we do our medical report, we first put down what's the current weight of the dog, okay? And then I put down what should a dog of that age, breed, and size weigh, okay? Because it's going to vary. I put down what % the dog is underweight, and then we go through and we go, are the skeletal bones prominent? Does it show muscle atrophy? Is the dog weak, or are there any other physical abnormalities due to his lack of weight? Like sometimes they'll come in, they'll be so emaciated that they'll be weak. Sometimes we'll run blood work showing that the dog's anemic or that the protein is low. We get these dogs that are really, really starved. We check for internal parasites, and then we give an opinion. Okay, why do we think this dog is thin? Again, real important is how long did it take to the dog to get to this, because very commonly when she'll go out, take a dog, and come back in, the owner will say, oh, the dog was perfect weight 2 days ago. This just happened overnight. And then, like I said, we use a consistent scale such as the tough scale. If the inadequate food, water, or low body weight, if the animal's deceased and underweight, we still do a necropsy. We check for internal body fat. We check for food in the stomach and also blockages. As Debbie was saying, several of our cases we actually did necropsies on, and they actually had a blockage. Corn cob is the most common thing we find, but sometimes we'll find other causes of blockages, especially if she'll come and say, you know, we took this dog, it had food and water in front of it, but it's still real skinny, and the owner said they couldn't get it to gain weight. So we definitely look for that. We also offer the dog food and see if it'll eat, and we document that. And then I'll do a follow-up medical. Usually we do it about 3 weeks later. We do weigh the dogs on a weekly basis, but we'll do a follow-up medical. How much weight has the dog gained? If there's other abnormalities, have they improved? and then we'll make the determination, does the dog have the normal ability to gain weight? Sometimes we'll find that there's something else going on with the dog. If we've fed it for 3 weeks and it's still not gaining weight, and we'll do blood work and try to find out if there's something else going on with it. But if in 3 weeks, it's gained a considerable amount of its weight back, then we'll just write up the medical and say, yes, the dog has the normal ability to gain weight if it was fed a normal diet, and now it's at this weight. And then we take the pictures. Now, I don't know if we've never prosecuted a case of obesity yet, and I don't know if we ever will, but that certainly is going the opposite direction. Traumatic injuries, gunshot wounds, embedded collars, stabbings, fractures, blunt trauma, a lot of being hit in the head, throwing the animal against the wall, and burning. So again, with the wounds, we describe the location, the size, the depth, the length of the wound, the length of time the wound's been there. If we can determine the cause of the injury, we will. Did it cause suffering? Prosecutors like us if we can say it caused suffering. And was the injury evident to a layperson? I mean, would somebody have looked at this dog normally and seen it, and would they have known that there was something wrong with it? So the embedded collars, we take photos with the collar and with the collar off. Note any odors. Sometimes taking that collar to court and opening the bag in the courtroom is worth 1,000 words, and describing the injuries. So these are just examples of embedded collars. That was a cord wrapped around the dog's body. Cut on top of the head. And then we'll do a follow-up medical. If we treat the dog, we're going to describe the injury now. Has it improved with proper medical treatment? And then take a picture. Lack of medical attention, see a lot of Demodex. Again, describing the condition, estimating the length of time, and does it cause suffering? Again, is the medical problem evident to a layperson? If it's a dog with Demodex and it's got one hair left on its body and its whole skin is nothing but one big crust, obviously somebody should have looked at that dog and known that there was a problem. So after the medical follow-up, if we treated it, did it improve with the proper treatment? And then unsuitable living conditions, unsanitary conditions, inadequate shelter, overcrowding, and tethering improperly. I think Debbie covered most of that. Again, from our point of view, we're going to describe the conditions, how long they may have been there, what physical or psychological problems would have been result from those conditions, and again, are the animals suffering? And then a follow-up, as the conditions improved, and has the animal conditions improved? Oops. And then dog fighting, we do a lot of dog fighting cases. Most of the time they're going to come in with being pit bulls. We describe the wounds found on the dogs. Most of the time they're going to be wounds, bite wounds on the face and the front legs are the most common locations. We'll also evaluate the temperament of the dog, especially as it relates to dog aggression. And that's how they commonly come in, with bite wounds to their face, abscesses, swellings. And then the animal hoarding, I think Debbie covered that in detail. And just to let you know that, that as veterinarians, we may know hoarders as clients, as staff members, or even other veterinarians. Rescue groups and shelters can also be hoarders. So just to let you know, just because someone puts rescue in front of their name or has a DVM doesn't mean that they can't become a hoarder. We have seen that. And then the signs of animal hoarding. How are we doing on time? Can we still keep going, or do you want me to stop? Real quickly. Okay, just signs of animal hoarding. Constantly changing parade of pets, most seen once and not again. And most of the time their visits are for things that are really horrendous. Not good preventative care. We don't see them for their vaccinations. We see them, like I said before, when they're got 3 paws in the grave. They usually see more than one veterinarian. They'll usually travel and go in between vets because they don't want to know, they don't want someone to know how many animals they actually have. They usually won't tell us how many they have. And then last but not least, severe matting and psychological cruelty and maggot infestation. And I think Debbie showed, and actually when this animal came in, we didn't even know what, the only reason I knew that was its head was because that's what the rabies stick was on. We couldn't even tell what was the front end or the back end. And just real quick, the future of animal cruelty, the University of Florida and the ASPCA have kind of combined, and now they actually have courses in veterinary forensics. So they're actually starting to train veterinarians in this area, which I think is great, like on blood spatters, gunshot wounds, clandestine grave sites. They had their first annual forensic seminar in 2008. Now they've done one every year since, and they actually have a veterinary forensic science program. So if anybody's interested in that, that's out there, and I think it's going to be a great help to us as we battle animal cruelty. And I think I've run us all out of time. So.